You're terrible at predicting what will make you happy. You spend years chasing things you think will make you happy, only to get them and realize they don't. The promotion feels good for 3 weeks. The new car stops mattering after 6 months. And the relationship you thought would complete you just creates different problems. Turns out, every life lesson you need to learn before it's too late starts with this one. You don't actually know what you want. Research on affective forecasting shows that people consistently neglect their own personality traits when predicting future happiness. Instead, they focus on external circumstances that matter far less. You assume the job title will change everything, that the bigger house will finally feel like enough, that the luxury purchase will deliver lasting satisfaction. None of it does. The problem is, purchases trigger something called hedonic adaptation, where the excitement fades fast and your baseline happiness resets. Meanwhile, the things that actually build satisfaction across years, relationships, personal autonomy, meaningful work, get pushed aside because they don't look as impressive from the outside. People waste entire decades optimizing for the wrong variables, then wonder why success feels hollow. Check whether your goals actually match what research shows creates lasting fulfillment, strong relationships, personal freedom, and work that feels meaningful. Everything else is just stuff that sounds good until you actually get it. Consistency beats talent. Talent gets you noticed early, then stops mattering. The naturally gifted kid who never had to work for it hits a wall the moment things get hard, while the person who built their ability through repetition just keeps improving. Skills continue to develop through consistent practice and structured learning. Talent provides an early advantage, but hits ceilings fast. Your brain rewires itself with repeated practice, regardless of starting ability, through a process called neuroplasticity. That means someone with average starting ability who practices deliberately for years will outperform someone with natural talent who coasts. The growth mindset, viewing abilities as trainable rather than fixed, leads to persistence and eventual mastery. Talent-focused individuals quit the moment natural ability plateaus because they've been told they're special for so long that difficulty feels like identity failure. Skill-focused individuals see struggle as confirmation they're expanding their abilities, which keeps them in the game. The gap between these two approaches becomes enormous across years. Treat every capability as learnable. Invest in deliberate practice with clear feedback rather than relying on innate gifts that only carry you so far. Talent opens doors. Consistency keeps you in the room long enough to accomplish something. The stories you tell yourself create who you become. There's a script running in your head right now that's deciding what you attempt, what you avoid, and how far you'll let yourself go. You probably didn't write it consciously, but it's been controlling your decisions for years. Self-narratives shape behavior through the confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecy. Repeated internal stories wire neural patterns that guide decisions automatically. Stories like, "I'm not smart," or "I'm not good enough," become self-reinforcing and block your ability to change. Your brain looks for evidence that confirms the narrative you've already accepted, which locks you into limiting patterns for life. If you tell yourself you're socially awkward, you'll avoid social situations, which means you never build the skills that would disprove the story. The cycle reinforces itself until the narrative feels like unchangeable truth rather than a story you accidentally adopted. Identity isn't biology. It's the story you kept telling yourself until you believed it. Rewrite limiting narratives by gathering counter-evidence that challenges them. Test new stories through small behavior changes that prove the old narrative wrong. Then reinforce the new version until it becomes automatic. The script running in your head isn't permanent. It just feels that way because you haven't questioned it yet. Sleep is a performance drug, not a luxury. You wouldn't show up to work drunk, but one bad night of sleep puts you at the same cognitive level. Reaction time slows, decision-making drops, memory fails. And yet, people treat it like something you can just push through. Sleep handles memory consolidation, hormone regulation, and cognitive function. One night of poor sleep mimics blood alcohol impairment levels in decision-making and reaction time. Chronic sleep debt destroys actual output and accelerates cognitive decline, which means you operate permanently handicapped, regardless of how hard you try. REM sleep handles problem-solving and emotional processing. Deep sleep handles physical recovery and immune function. Skipping either stage consistently creates deficits that show up as brain fog, poor judgment, and physical breakdown. Athletes treat sleep like performance enhancement because it is. Your body repairs muscle tissue, your brain clears metabolic waste, and your hormones reset during sleep. Cut it short, and none of that happens properly. Protect 7 to 9 hours nightly as non-negotiable. Optimize your sleep environment by keeping it dark, cool, and quiet, and maintain a consistent schedule even on weekends. Cutting sleep for productivity destroys the productivity you were trying to create, and the debt piles up faster than you realize. Commitment beats motivation. Motivation is just a feeling that comes and goes, usually right when you need it most. The people who actually build something aren't the ones who get hyped and go hard for 2 weeks. They're the ones who show up when it's boring. Routine and commitment deliver success far more than motivation ever will. They work because they remove the decision entirely. Habit formation via neural pathway automation makes behaviors require less willpower until they run subconsciously. That means you stop needing to feel motivated to take action, because the action happens automatically. Relying on motivation guarantees inconsistency and stagnation, because you're waiting for a feeling that never shows up on hard days. The cumulative math is simple. 1% daily improvements amount to 37 times growth across a year. That may not sound like much until you realize most people aren't improving at all. They're cycling between motivation spikes and crashes that average out to 0. Build systems and routines that function regardless of mood. Use environmental cues and habit stacking to make desired behaviors automatic. Place your running shoes by the door. Prep tomorrow's meals tonight. Remove obstacles from the behaviors you want and add them to the behaviors you don't. Motivation gets you started. Commitment keeps you going when motivation disappears. Discomfort is the price of change. Growth doesn't happen in your comfort zone, and your comfort zone is exactly where your brain wants you to stay. Anything worth becoming requires you to sit in the awkwardness of not being there yet. Neuroplasticity requires challenge. Brains adapt only when pushed beyond current capacity, which means dodging discomfort permanently limits your capabilities, while embracing it is the only path to expanding what you can handle. The learning zone sits between too easy, which brings no change, and too hard, which causes shutdown. Discomfort signals optimal growth. Your brain is wired to avoid discomfort because, historically, discomfort meant danger. But modern discomfort rarely kills you. It just feels bad temporarily while your brain builds new pathways. Do one thing every day that scares you just a little. Not enough to paralyze you, just enough to stretch what you can handle. Try the conversation that makes you nervous. Lift the weight that feels too heavy. Take on the work project that feels beyond you right now. Your brain will beg you to stop. Ignore it. Capability lives on the other side of that resistance, and every time you push through, your comfort zone expands. You can't outwork a broken environment. Willpower only works when your surroundings aren't actively fighting you. If your desk is cluttered, your phone never leaves your hand, and every distraction is one click away, no amount of discipline will fix what bad design created. Environmental cues override discipline. Poor workspace design drops productivity 38 to 70% regardless of effort, which means fighting your environment burns willpower daily and guarantees failure. Specific saboteurs include noise, clutter, and visible temptations that override even strong discipline. Willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day. By evening, you've got nothing left, which is why people collapse into scrolling and junk food after work. Redesign spaces to make desired behaviors effortless and undesired ones harder. Remove your phone from the bedroom for better sleep. Eliminate junk food from the house. Create distraction-free work zones by removing everything that isn't directly needed for the task. Stop trying to overpower bad environments with sheer willpower. That's a losing battle. Fix the environment instead, and watch how much easier discipline becomes when your surroundings support you. Delayed gratification beats immediate gratification. You're one click away from buying something you'll forget about in a week. Waiting feels like punishment, and your brain is screaming that you deserve the instant reward. But that voice is the same one that keeps you broke, out of shape, and stuck in the same place year after year. The Stanford Marshmallow Study tracked kids who could delay gratification and found they had better SAT scores, lower obesity, and higher life satisfaction 30 years later. That one skill predicted life outcomes better than most other childhood measures. Instant gratification trades long-term success for short-term pleasure, keeping you trapped in paycheck-to-paycheck existence. Delayed choices like saving, studying, and training multiply over time. Instant choices like spending, scrolling, and coasting deplete. Your brain's reward system doesn't care about future you. It wants dopamine now, and every time you give in, you're reinforcing that the wait is intolerable. But when you resist, you're training your brain that waiting is survivable, and each successful wait makes future self-control stronger. Practice the 10-10-10 rule. Consider how you'll feel about this choice in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. If it only serves the 10-minute version of you, skip it. The voice demanding instant reward isn't wisdom. It's the part of your brain that would still be living in a cave if the rest of your brain didn't overrule it regularly. Your body keeps score of the stress you ignore. You can tell yourself you're fine, but your nervous system is keeping receipts. Every ignored deadline, every tense conversation, every sleepless night gets stored somewhere, and eventually the bill comes due. Chronic stress disrupts the HPA axis, which controls your stress response, keeping cortisol levels elevated far longer than they're meant to be. Sustained high cortisol weakens immune function, damages cardiovascular health, and disrupts digestion. Ignoring stress doesn't make it disappear. It escalates into serious health consequences that shorten lifespan and quality of life. Each ignored stressor adds to allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on your body, until systems break down. You push through the headaches, ignore the tight chest, dismiss the constant fatigue, and tell yourself you just need to get through this and things will calm down. Meanwhile, your body is recording everything and calculating the cost. Unprocessed stress manifests physically as tension, pain, and illness that can't be dismissed as coincidence. The link between chronic stress and heart disease, autoimmune disorders, and mental health issues isn't theoretical, it's measurable. Treat stress management as essential maintenance, not optional luxury. Process stress actively through movement and therapy, and don't forget rest. Stress doesn't vanish because you're too busy to deal with it. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget, and eventually forces the conversation you've been avoiding. Action beats overthinking. The perfect plan doesn't exist, and waiting for it just means someone else already started. You learn more from one bad attempt than from 10 hours of research. Overthinking guarantees stagnation, while action creates the data you need to actually improve. Research shows imperfect action outperforms perfect planning because doers get feedback that corrects course, while thinkers stay stuck in loops. You spend weeks researching the perfect workout routine when you could have started lifting and learned what works for your body. You delay launching the project until everything's perfect, and by the time you're ready, the opportunity's gone. The cost is brutal. Time spent overthinking could be spent learning from real-world experience, and the variables you're trying to optimize in your head won't behave the way you expect in reality anyway. The fix isn't better planning, it's accepting uncertainty. Use the 70% rule. Act when 70% confident rather than waiting for certainty that never comes. Thinking feels productive because it's comfortable. Acting feels risky because it exposes you to the unknown. But thinking only generates theories. Action generates answers. Failure is feedback, not fatal. When you fail and treat it like proof that you're not good enough, you stop trying. When you fail and treat it like information about what didn't work, you adjust and go again. Failure isn't the problem. Giving up after failure is. Every failure teaches you something: what doesn't work, where your assumptions went wrong, and which variables you didn't account for. That information is how you actually get better. You can't learn to navigate without hitting a few walls first, and the person who fails 10 times and extracts lessons from each becomes far more capable than the person who played it safe and learned nothing. High performers fail more frequently because they're testing the edges rather than staying comfortable. Failure rate doesn't predict failure, it predicts eventual success, because each attempt reveals information you couldn't access through planning alone. If you're not failing occasionally, you're not pushing hard enough to grow. Treat failure as data collection. What went well, what went wrong, and what would you do differently for the next attempt? Failure only destroys you if you let it stop you. Otherwise, it's just education that makes you harder to beat. Fail often, fail fast, fail forward, and try again. Avoiding difficult conversations costs more than having them. The thing you're not saying is already damaging the relationship. You think you're protecting it by staying quiet, but silence doesn't preserve connection. It creates more distance than the discomfort ever would. Difficult conversations aren't threats to relationships. They're how relationships deepen. Conflict handled well builds trust because it proves the relationship can handle truth. When you address tension directly, you're showing the other person that honesty matters more than comfort, which creates safety they can't get from someone who only tells them what they want to hear. Avoidance does the opposite. It turns relationships into polite performances where no one says what they mean and everyone keeps up the facade. The irritation you're swallowing doesn't disappear. It builds into resentment that poisons everything. The boundary violation you're tolerating trains the other person that it is acceptable, and the feedback you're withholding ensures the dynamic stays broken indefinitely. Reality is, the conversation will happen eventually, either as an intentional discussion when it's still manageable, or as an explosion when resentment finally detonates. Address conflicts while they're still small. Open with empathy, listen fully, and problem-solve collaboratively rather than defensively. People respect honesty more than they resent discomfort, and most relationships end not because hard conversations happened, but because they didn't. Those 12 life lessons will change how you operate if you actually apply them. But there's another 12 that focus less on you versus yourself and more on you versus everyone else. Relationships, decisions, and the traps most people don't see until the damage is done. Make sure you check out Part 2.